My stepmother, Francine, stood at my father's funeral podium, wearing the pearl necklace he'd given my real mother 20 years ago. The morning light from the church windows caught the pearls just right, making them gleam against her black dress, the same dress she'd bought on a shopping spree just 2 days after Dad died. I knew because I'd seen the receipt on the kitchen counter when I stopped by the house to pick up photos for the memorial service. "Before we conclude today's service," Francine announced, her voice carrying that fake sweetness she'd perfected over 8 years of marriage to my father, "I need to address something important. Harold and I discussed this many times, and he was very clear about his wishes." The church fell silent. 200 people, all waiting, all watching. I sat in the third row, not the first where immediate family should be. Francine had made sure of that, seating her sister Dolly and her son Rowan in the front row instead, leaving me behind like I was just another acquaintance paying respects. "Harold left everything to his real family," she continued, her gray eyes finding mine across the rows of mourners. "Not to children from previous marriages, not to people who barely visited him in his final years. He left his legacy to those of us who truly loved him and stood by him every single day." I heard my Aunt Judith gasp beside me. My father's brother, Uncle Glenn, grabbed his wife's hand so tight his knuckles went white. Behind Francine, her sister Dolly was nodding along like this was all perfectly rehearsed, which, knowing Francine, it probably was. Her son Rowan, all 22 years of cocky entitlement, actually smirked as he watched me from his front row seat. The 3 hardware stores Harold built from nothing, our beautiful home on Maple Street, his investments, everything he worked 40 years to create. Francine dabbed at her completely dry eyes with a handkerchief. He left it all to me and my son Rowan, who Harold considered his true son. "Bethany," she said my name like it tasted bitter. "Harold was very specific that you were not to receive anything. He felt you'd abandoned him when he found happiness with us." The whispers started immediately. 200 people suddenly became a jury, and I could feel their eyes on me, some pitying, some shocked, some probably wondering if I really had been the terrible daughter Francine was painting me as. My hands shook as I gripped the funeral program, Dad's smiling face on the cover looking nothing like the exhausted man I'd last seen 2 weeks before his death. "That's a lie," I said, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. Did you say something, Bethany?" Francine asked from the podium, her voice amplified by the microphone. "Please, share with everyone what you wanted to say." I stood up, my legs unsteady. "I said that's a lie. Dad would never do that. You kept me away. You canceled our dinners. You told me he needed space." "Oh dear," Francine sighed dramatically. "This is exactly the kind of behavior Harold was trying to avoid, making scenes, causing drama. He just wanted peace in his final years." That's when Mr. Aldrich stood up from the back of the church. Theodore Aldrich had been our family lawyer for 30 years, had handled my mother's estate when she died, had been at my high school graduation party in our backyard. He walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the now silent church, his leather briefcase in hand. "Mrs. Delaney," he said, his deep voice carrying without a microphone, "I'm afraid there's been a significant development regarding Harold's estate." Francine's perfectly composed face cracked just slightly. "What development? You have the will. You witnessed it yourself last year when Harold signed it." "I did witness that will," Mr. Aldrich agreed, reaching the front of the church. "However, 3 days before Harold's death, he came to my office, alone. He created a new will, revoked the previous one entirely, and left very specific instructions." "That's impossible." Francine's voice went sharp, losing all its fake sweetness. "Harold was with me 3 days before he died. Actually, you were at your sister Dolly's spa retreat. Harold showed me the receipt." Mr. Aldrich pulled out a tablet from his briefcase. "He also left this video with explicit instructions to play it if anything happened to him within the year. Given the circumstances of his sudden death, I believe now would be the appropriate time." Before Francine could object, before anyone could move, Mr. Aldrich pressed play, and my father's face filled the screen. He looked terrible in the video, nothing like the robust man who'd built a business empire from a single corner shop. And then he spoke the words that changed everything. "If you're watching this," she killed me. The morning of the funeral, I'd driven 3 hours from Millbrook, where I taught 4th grade, my hands trembling on the steering wheel the entire way. The radio played Dad's favorite oldies station, and I had to turn it off when Stand By Me came on because that was the song he'd danced to with my mother at their wedding. Every mile marker on the highway felt like another step toward accepting something I couldn't believe. Harold Delaney, my father, the strongest man I knew, was dead at 58. A heart attack at his desk, they said. The maintenance manager at his main store had found him slumped over inventory reports at 6 in the morning, his coffee still warm, his pen still in his hand. No warning signs, no previous conditions, just gone between one heartbeat and the next. The paramedics said he'd probably died instantly, that he hadn't suffered. But I kept thinking about him alone in that office. No one there to hold his hand, no one there to say goodbye. When I arrived at the church, my Aunt Judith was waiting for me on the front steps, her face red from crying. "Bethany, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling me into a hug that smelled like her lavender perfume. "Francine's been making all the arrangements without consulting anyone. She even changed the flowers you ordered, said white roses were too depressing and switched them to yellow carnations." "Mom loved white roses," I said numbly. "Dad always brought them to her grave." "I know, honey. We all know. But Francine's been playing the grieving widow to perfection, and everyone's too polite to challenge her." Inside the church, Francine was holding court near the casket, surrounded by her friends from the country club. She wore a designer black dress that probably cost more than I made in a month teaching, her blonde hair perfectly styled, despite supposedly being devastated by grief. Harold and I were so happy. She kept telling anyone who would listen, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, even though I hadn't seen a single tear fall. He always said I brought joy back into his life after Patricia passed. These 8 years were the happiest of his life. My mother. Patricia had died when I was 14, holding my hand in the hospice, telling me to take care of Dad. Cancer had taken her slowly, giving us time to say everything that needed saying. Dad had been destroyed by her loss. For 6 years, it had been just the two of us, eating frozen dinners in front of the TV, slowly learning how to laugh again, how to live with the Patricia-shaped hole in our lives. Then Francine swept in like a hurricane in high heels. They'd met at a Chamber of Commerce meeting where she was representing her late husband's insurance business. Within 3 months, she'd moved into our house with her son, Rowan, who immediately started treating Dad's things like they'd always belonged to him. I'd come home from college to find Rowan driving Dad's truck, wearing Dad's watch, calling him Pops, like they'd known each other for years instead of months. "You know she made him change beneficiaries on everything last year," my father's brother Glenn muttered to me during the viewing, while Francine was busy arranging herself into a picturesquely grieving pose for the local newspaper photographer. The stores, the house, all the life insurance policies. My brother called me drunk one night, said he didn't remember signing half the papers she put in front of him. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, staring at Dad's face in the casket. They'd put too much makeup on him. He looked like a wax figure, nothing like the man who'd taught me to change a tire, to use a drill, to never let anyone make me feel small. He begged me not to, said Francine would make his life hell if she found out he'd been talking. Besides, he kept saying he was going to fix it, that he just needed to find the right time. The right time never came, apparently. Dad had seemed different these past few months whenever I managed to see him. He'd lost weight, his skin had a grayish tint, and he was always tired. Our weekly dinners had become monthly after Francine started making excuses. "Harold's not feeling up to it tonight," she'd say when I called. "You know how men are, never wanting to admit when they're under the weather." The last time I'd seen him alive was 2 weeks before he died. He'd looked exhausted, sitting in his favorite armchair, like it took all his energy just to stay upright. "Bethany," he'd said, reaching for my hand with fingers that felt too cold, too thin. "If anything happens to me, remember that I love you. Remember that you were the best thing that ever happened to your mother and me." "Dad, you're scaring me. What's wrong?" But Francine had swept into the room then, all fake concern and possessive touches, saying he needed his rest, that I should go. The funeral reception was held at Dad's house, though Francine had already started calling it her house in conversations with her country club friends. She'd wasted no time making changes. All the photos of my mother had vanished from the mantel, replaced with pictures from Francine's Caribbean cruise with Dad last spring. Mom's china cabinet had been moved to the garage, and Francine's gaudy gold-trimmed furniture now dominated the living room where I'd opened Christmas presents for 30 years. "Bethany?" Francine called out as I stood looking at the spot where Mom's portrait used to hang. Her voice was loud enough to cut through every conversation in the room. "I need you to return your house key. Today." I turned to face her, aware that 40 relatives and family friends were now watching us. That key was from when I was a child. Dad gave it to me when I was 12. "Well, you're not a child anymore, are you? You're 34 years old. Harold and I discussed this extensively. He wanted a fresh start with his real family." She gestured to Rowan, who was already examining Dad's vintage watch collection in the display case, probably calculating their resale value. His real family? The words felt like glass in my throat. That's right. The family that was here for him every day, not the daughter who visited maybe once a month, if that. "Do you know how many times Harold asked if you were coming to dinner and you had some excuse? A parent conference, grading papers, always something more important than your father. You told me not to come. You said he needed space, that my visits were stressing him out." Francine laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Is that the story you're telling yourself? How convenient." My cousin Melinda stepped forward. "Now wait a minute, Francine. We all know Bethany tried to see Harold constantly. You're the one who kept canceling plans." "Nobody asked for your opinion, Melinda," Francine snapped. "This is a family matter." "Bethany is family," Uncle Glenn said, his voice hard. "Not anymore." Francine walked to the fireplace where everyone could see her clearly. She picked up her champagne glass and tapped it with her wedding ring, the huge diamond Dad had bought her catching the light. "I have an announcement to make, and I think it's best we clear the air now, during Harold's celebration of life." The room went silent. Even the catering staff stopped moving. "I want to thank you all for coming today. Harold would be so touched to see how many people cared about him. As you know, he and I built a beautiful life together these 8 years. He told me many times that I gave him the family he always truly wanted." Her eyes found mine across the room, cold and triumphant. "That's why he made sure his legacy would go to his real family. He left everything to me and Rowan. The 3 hardware stores, this house, all investments and assets, everything." Gasps echoed through the room. Someone dropped a glass in the kitchen. "He was very specific in his will," Francine continued, pulling a document from her purse. "Updated last year with Mr. Aldrich as witness. Harold wanted to make sure his actual family was taken care of. Bethany, you were deliberately excluded. He felt you'd abandoned him when he found happiness with me and Rowan. He said you only called when you needed money for your classroom supplies or your car repairs." "That's not true." The words exploded out of me. "I never asked Dad for money. I paid him back every cent from college. You're lying." "Am I? Then why did he change his will? Why did he specifically state that you should receive nothing, not even your mother's jewelry?" "Mom's jewelry?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "You have Mom's jewelry." "Had. I sold most of it last month. Harold said I could do whatever I wanted with it. After all, why keep relics from his painful past when he had such a bright future with us?" Rowan chose that moment to speak up, twirling Dad's Rolex on his wrist. "Harold always said I was the son he wished he'd had from the start, someone who appreciated him, who wanted to learn the business instead of wasting time with finger paintings and story time." "Those finger paintings were from my students," I said, my voice shaking. "Dad loved displaying them in his office." "Actually, he threw those out months ago," Francine said smoothly. "He was embarrassed when real business associates saw them. So childish." Aunt Judith was crying now. Uncle Glenn looked ready to throw something. The room felt like a powder keg, everyone waiting for someone else to light the match. That's when I noticed Mr. Aldrich in the corner, his expression unreadable, his hand resting on his briefcase like he was waiting for exactly the right moment to speak. Mr. Aldrich stood up from the corner where he'd been sitting quietly throughout Francine's performance. The leather of his briefcase creaked as he lifted it onto the side table, and every eye in the room turned to him. Theodore Aldrich had been my father's lawyer and friend for 30 years, the kind of man who still wore three-piece suits to grocery stores and never raised his voice, not even in court. "Mrs. Delaney," he said, his tone formal and measured, "I'm afraid there's been a significant development regarding Harold's estate." Francine's triumphant smile flickered like a candle in wind. "What development?" "You have the will. You witnessed it yourself last year in your office." "I did witness that will," Mr. Aldrich confirmed, opening his briefcase with deliberate precision. "However, 3 days before Harold's death, he came to my office, alone. He was quite specific about that detail. He waited until he knew you'd be gone for the entire day." "That's impossible," Francine said, her voice losing its honeyed coating. "Harold was with me 3 days before he died. We spent the entire day together planning our anniversary party." "Actually, you were at your sister Dolly's spa retreat in Asheville. Harold showed me the receipt. He also showed me the credit card statement where you'd been charging these retreats every Wednesday for the past 6 months. He said it gave him the perfect opportunity to handle some urgent business." Dolly's face went red. "Francine, what's he talking about?" "He's obviously confused," Francine snapped. "Harold was probably seeing him about store leases or something routine." Mr. Aldrich pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Harold came to revoke his previous will entirely. He created a new one, which I witnessed along with 2 other attorneys from my firm. He was very concerned about challenges to its validity, so he took extraordinary precautions. We even had him examined by Dr. Morton that same morning to certify his mental competency." "This is ridiculous." Francine's voice went shrill. "You can't just produce a new will after someone dies. This is fraud." "The will was filed with the county clerk's office that same afternoon," Mr. Aldrich continued calmly. "Harold insisted on that. He said, and I quote, 'I want this locked down tighter than Fort Knox because I know she'll fight it.'" Rowan stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "This is garbage. Harold loved us. He told me last week I was taking over the stores when I turned 25. "The new will tells a different story," Mr. Aldrich said, pulling out documents. "Harold left the house and all its contents to Bethany, including Patricia's jewelry, which he noted had been taken without his permission. The 3 hardware stores are to be placed in an irrevocable trust with Bethany as sole beneficiary. All investment accounts, life insurance policies, and remaining assets go to Bethany as well." The room erupted. Francine's friends were whispering furiously. My relatives looked stunned. Uncle Glenn actually smiled for the first time since we'd learned of Dad's death. "There is a provision for you, Mrs. Delaney," Mr. Aldrich continued over the noise. "Harold left you $50,000, but only if you vacate the house within 30 days and return all items belonging to Patricia Delaney, including the pearl necklace you're currently wearing." Francine's hand flew to the pearls at her throat. "These were a gift. Harold gave them to me. Harold gave them to Patricia for their 20th wedding anniversary. I was there. I have the receipt in my files, actually, since Harold asked me to keep copies of all major purchases for tax purposes." "You're lying!" Francine screamed, her composure finally cracking completely. "Harold loved me. He chose me. He said so every day." "He also said something else," Mr. Aldrich said, pulling out a tablet from his briefcase. "Harold insisted on recording a video message. He was very specific about when it should be played. He said, 'If I die within a year of making this recording, play it at my funeral in front of everyone, so there can be no doubt about my wishes.'" "You can't do this," Francine said, but her voice had gone quiet, dangerous. "I'll sue. I'll fight this in court for years." "Harold anticipated that," Mr. Aldrich said. "That's why he made the video. He wanted everyone to hear, in his own words, exactly why he changed his will. He also left a sealed envelope with the police department, to be opened only in the event of his death within the year." "The police?" Rowan's cocky attitude evaporated. "Why would he involve the police?" Mr. Aldrich looked directly at Francine as he answered. "Because Harold believed his life was in danger. He believed someone very close to him was trying to kill him, and he wanted to make sure the truth would come out no matter what happened." Mr. Aldrich turned the tablet toward the room and pressed play. Dad's face filled the screen, and I had to grab the back of a chair to steady myself. He looked terrible in the video, his skin gray and papery, his eyes sunken deep in their sockets. This was not the robust man who'd built 3 hardware stores from nothing, who could carry lumber on his shoulders well into his 50s. This was a dying man. "My name is Harold Delaney," Dad's recorded voice said, weak but clear. "Today is October 15th, and I'm recording this in my lawyer's office because I believe my life is in danger. If you're watching this, then I'm dead. And it wasn't from natural causes, no matter what the death certificate says." Francine lunged for the tablet, but Uncle Glenn and 2 other relatives blocked her path. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. "This is a fake! Someone doctored this video!" Dad continued speaking, each word measured and deliberate. "My wife Francine has been poisoning me. I know how insane that sounds, but I have proof. 6 weeks ago, I started getting sick every morning after coffee. Only after coffee that she made. When I started making my own coffee or skipping it entirely, I felt better. When she noticed I wasn't drinking it, she started putting it in my food." The room was absolutely silent now, except for Francine's heavy breathing. "I installed hidden cameras in our bedroom and kitchen without telling her," Dad said. "I have 17 separate recordings of her putting white powder into my coffee, my soup, my pasta sauce. She always did it when she thought I was in the bathroom or on the phone. I had the powder tested. It's thallium, rat poison." Someone gasped. Melinda covered her mouth with both hands. I felt like the floor was tilting beneath my feet. "I went to Detective Morrison at the police department with the evidence." Dad's image gestured to papers in front of him. "He said they needed more proof for an arrest, so I've been documenting everything. These are my medical records from Dr. Kepler showing chronic thallium poisoning over 6 months. My hair has been falling out. My hands shake constantly. I can barely keep food down." The camera zoomed in on the medical reports, showing test results, toxicology screens, all confirming systematic poisoning. "She started right after I added her to my will last year," Dad said, looking directly into the camera now. "I think she's been planning this from the beginning. I found out from her first husband's sister that he died the same way. Sudden heart attack at his desk. No autopsy. Francine inherited everything." Rowan was backing toward the door, his face white. "Mom, what is he talking about? Dad had a heart attack. You said Dad had a heart attack." "Shut up, Rowan," Francine snarled, dropping all pretense of grief. Dad's video continued. "I changed my will 3 days ago to leave everything to my daughter Bethany, my only real family. Francine isolated me from her, made me believe Bethany only cared about money. She deleted Bethany's voicemails, blocked her number on my phone, told her I needed space when really I was desperate to see her. She wanted me alone and dependent on her." Tears were streaming down my face now. All those months of rejected invitations, unreturned calls, thinking my father was choosing his new family over me. "Bethany, if you're watching this," Dad said, and his voice broke slightly, "I need you to know that every terrible thing I said, every time I pushed you away, it was her. She stood behind me when I was on the phone with you telling me what to say. She threatened to leave me, to take everything if I didn't cooperate. And I was already so sick, so confused from the poison that I gave in. Please forgive me, sweetheart. You were always the light of my life. You and your mother both." Dad held up another document. "This is a signed statement from Marcus Webb, the pharmacist at Riverside Pharmacy. Francine bought rat poison 6 times in the last 8 months. She said they had an infestation at her sister's rental property. Dolly Perkins doesn't own any rental property." The video showed Dad reaching under his shirt, pulling out a small key. "Bethany, this opens a safety deposit box at First National, branch 447, box 1823. Everything's in there. All the evidence, all the recordings, all the medical records. Detective Morrison has copies of everything. If I die before Francine is arrested, he promised to pursue charges." The last thing Dad said made everyone in the room freeze. "Check the basement freezer, behind the frozen vegetables in the back compartment. I kept every single coffee cup she poisoned before I could drink it all. 23 cups, all labeled with dates, all containing thallium. I've been dying for months to gather this evidence. By the time you see this, it'll be too late for me, but not for justice." The video ended with Dad looking directly into the camera one last time. "I love you, Bethany. Tell your mother I'll see her soon." The screen went black, and for a moment, nobody moved. Then the front door burst open and Detective Morrison walked in with 3 uniformed officers. "Mrs. Francine Delaney," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "You're under arrest for the murder of Harold Delaney." "This is entrapment!" Francine screamed as an officer pulled her hands behind her back. "That video is fake. Harold was senile. Bethany made this up. She paid people to lie." "We've had a warrant to search your house since yesterday," Detective Morrison said calmly. "We were waiting for the funeral to end, but given what we just heard, we're moving now. We've already recovered the coffee cups from the freezer. 23 cups, just like Harold said. The lab confirmed thallium in every single one." "Mom," Rowan's voice cracked like he was 12 instead of 22. "Mom, tell them it's not true." Francine turned to him, and for the first time since I'd known her, her mask completely fell away. "Everything I did was for you, for us. We deserved that money. We deserved this life." Rowan stumbled backward like she'd slapped him. "You killed him. You actually killed Harold. He was good to me. He was teaching me the business." "He was teaching you to be his employee, not his heir," Francine spat as the officers led her toward the door. "You think he would have left you anything? You were just the baggage that came with me." As they dragged her out, she turned to me with pure venom in her eyes. "You think you've won? You'll be as alone as your pathetic father was. Nobody will ever love you the way someone loved him." "No," I said, finding my voice at last. "I'll be alive. That's the difference between us. I'll be alive, and Dad's memory will be honored, and you'll be in prison where you belong." 6 months later, I stood in Dad's office at the main hardware store, now my office, watching Hank train a new employee. The trial had been swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Francine got life without parole. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours, and most of that was filling out paperwork. Rowan had been the prosecution's star witness. 2 weeks after the funeral, he'd come to me with a confession that broke my heart all over again. "She did the same thing to my dad," he'd said, sobbing in my kitchen. "I was 14. I suspected something was wrong, but I was too scared to say anything. She told me we'd be homeless if anyone found out, that nobody would believe a kid anyway." He testified about finding rat poison in her purse when he was 15, about how she'd made his father change his will just months before his sudden heart attack. The prosecutors were investigating that death too, though proving it would be harder after 7 years. I kept all 3 stores running with Hank's help. He'd worked for Dad for 20 years and knew the business inside and out. "Your father would be so proud," he told me one afternoon as we reviewed quarterly reports. "You're not just maintaining what he built, you're making it better." I'd found more videos on Dad's computer, dozens of them, recorded over his final months. Not evidence, just messages. Him talking about my mother, about the day I was born, about teaching me to ride a bike in the parking lot of store number 2. "Bethany brings light into every room she enters," he'd said in one video, smiling despite his obvious exhaustion. "Just like her mother did. I'm the luckiest man alive to have been loved by both of them." The house felt alive again. I'd restored all of Mom's photos, hung her portrait back in its rightful place above the mantel. Uncle Glenn and Aunt Judith came for Sunday dinners. My cousins brought their kids to play in the backyard where I'd once played. The isolation Francine had forced on our family was finally healing. Last week, I established the Harold and Patricia Delaney Foundation, using the profits from the stores to provide free tools and training to young people wanting to learn trades. Dad had always said knowledge was the only thing nobody could steal from you. Now his legacy would be teaching others, giving them the chances he'd wished he'd had when he was starting out. Standing in his office, surrounded by the finger paintings from my students that I'd rehung on every wall, I understood something fundamental about love and family. Real love doesn't isolate. It doesn't control or manipulate or destroy. Real love protects, even from beyond the grave. Dad had spent his final months gathering evidence, knowing it was killing him, because protecting me mattered more than prolonging his poisoned life. That's the story of how my father solved his own murder, how a woman's greed destroyed her, and how sometimes the dead speak louder than the living ever could. If this story touched you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below if you've ever had a family member who showed their love by protecting you, even when it cost them everything. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories of justice, family, and the love that transcends even death. Thank you for listening to my father's story. Thank you for helping me keep his memory alive.